Okay. Stillness. Poetry out of intrusive thoughts, like house out of discarded wood, like purpose from walls of trauma, like sunlight creeping wintry eyelash, like beast from tap dancing mouth, like wind caressing nostril breath, like skin always remembering skin, like there is never any stillness while we are breathing, like there is always stillness while we are breathing, like the moon doesn't deceive us, like the shame of this world afraid to take you, like you are not anything like the ones who hurt you, like you are not anything like the ones who hurt you. This one's new and it's written about this time I was running for work for the 99 and I fell and I screamed and I got this scab on my foot that is still healing. So if you have any advice about healing, anyway, Polyscore's really helpful. Good poem. Temporary tattoo. The scab is a fracking field, but it is also delicate. A fallen sakura petal drenched in kitty piss. Hot liquid extracted from the ground to be the dark canopies hiding a thunderstorm secret, smelling fresh, but only if your nose, tube, or scab and cut open. Psychologists are simply priests who have assigned their profession, taking the pink stuff to call us by holy names. The clanging of angry chairs fills my downy ears. I am bored of this room's stage-frightened colors and wonder about whether pain had a personality, the kind that changes. That restaurant owner stole their workers' tips. The other one's way better anyway. I will be waiting for the snow to melt, feel the salt corrode my skin like kisses that leave a scab. Sing Sing, need some love? Nothing, I say, because a little temporary scar is like a temporary tattoo. Pretty and alive and delicate, if almost edible like toe beans that grab my coffee-shaped wrists, press a washable tattoo on my arms, squeeze me through the sheltering roofs of trees no longer there. The pink stuff makes a balloon in the shape of a bank account, blooming and blooming and waiting, so slowly waiting to be popped. This poem, thanks. It's called Emo Daddy Culture. A friend of mine had a really funny Twitter username called Emo Dad Culture, and this is kind of inspired by that. Emo Daddy Culture. You've heard of Emo Dad Culture, but have you heard of Emo Daddy Culture? You've heard of Emo Daddy Culture, but have you heard of Goth Daddy Couture? You've heard of That's Just Vampires, but have you heard of Punk Uncle Diaries? You've heard of embarrassing take your kids to work venues, but have you heard of jock anti-discourse? You've heard of queer dodgeball after parties, but have you heard of screamo mom aesthetics? You've heard of www.insertyournoisebandgear.bandcamp.com, but have you heard of screamo pop-up shops like Camping Records? You've heard of nightclubs gentrifying Chinatown, but have you heard of emotional father cultural studies, a 400-level course offered at the University of British Columbia? You've heard of every other upper year English seminar, but have you heard of progressive moms gossip? You've heard of New Mount Pleasant Yoga Studio, but have you heard of metal mummy theory? You've heard of metal mummy theory, but have you heard of metal mummification therapy? You've heard of I'm kink-shaming you and making fun of your taste in music at the same time, but have you heard of math rock dad polyamory? You've heard of complicated cooking dynamics, but have you heard of emo dad culture? Earlier drafts. Losing thumbtacks, like losing stanzas, like losing roof tiles, like losing fish scales, like losing pebbles, like losing Lakewood, and even losing her, the moon, so perfect and pumpkin pie, as if you never said goodbye to earlier drafts of yourself. Each night you refused, hugging edges of morning with purple fingers all ready to waylay her as she sprang through the door, but it's not her you lost, but time, not a poem you lost, but times you spent, like gorge-sized pouches of loose change, stretching memory wide, not a water bottle, gone, but a mother hurling away a milk jug existence at the end of an assembly line, and a barrel, and a bucket, and a bicycle yelling its not innocence flushed away, but an umbrella that has decided, how dare she, to replace you with the trunk of a tree that has long stopped, sobbing, as though dry metallic branches could ever be an arm lullaby enough to not let her slip away, like clouds lose their sweetheart rain, like there is no difference between the first drop or last, because you couldn't hold on. Just couldn't hold on to these one-time forever water things until the bottom of your barrel is empty, the coffee burning your feet, the cement, with blind box things in a forgotten pocket, humble with the rings and shadows of still and dewy and other things. So this is like the first short story I've ever got published, and which is cool. All of last time, Shazia was doing some poetry, and she asked me a question. And she's like, "Oh, what do you like to write?" And I talked about how I only write my fiction is only existentialist writer gay fan fiction. So this is my debut into that world. And it was inspired by this dream that I had. Gregor's lover. In his last days, Gregor was loved, cherished, and cared for. You may have read The Metamorphosis, but may not have heard of my book, which is the book I spent the better part of my 40s writing to remember him. What Kafka didn't put in his story was that I was there in the last moments of Gregor's life, making sure he had some water to drink, even if he couldn't hold any down, and ensure that he heard a voice, even if just one, that will remember him. The book I wrote is my attempt, through words, to host a real burial, a big elaborate wake, for the man whose illness made him grotesque and unlovable to most. I am Gregor's loved one, who couldn't hold his hand, having none to hold, but held, and am still holding, his breath in his last efforts of life. Dear reader, you might be burning with curiosity. You are wondering why Kafka didn't mention this part. If it really was fiction, why would I be coming back now? Shouldn't I be dead and buried, long forgotten too? But it may not have occurred to you to ask some other questions. Who saw and documented Gregor's last days? Which characters do these allegedly third-person perspectives lead? Why are we only able to hear my voice now, after so many years? In this story, everything else is the same. But where his family abandoned him, I sneaked past them and put a barricade up between myself and everything that hurt Gregor. I couldn't, on my own, move him to the doctor, so I brought my own medicines. Flowers from my garden, music from my collections, poems from my grandfather's heirloom shelf. And I was there because I loved him. Being a traveling salesman, Gregor had little time to see me, but we exchanged long letters and postcards, so many of them. The last one I received from him smelled like Florentine cigars, musty like an old leather-bound book. It was as if Gregor had slipped the card inside one while in an old bureaucrat's library, sneakily opened it, feigning interest in the contents of the book, and took the card out again when the man wasn't looking. I wouldn't be able to tell you how the postcard smelled this way, but knew that Gregor always had a sense of mischief when he was out and about, working those long hours. Our letters to avoid suspicion were never too passionate. In the book I transcribed each one of them, but kept the originals for myself. I kept the little drawings Gregor did of what he sold, what he saw, and the characters he encountered. These drawings were funny and affectionate. They were ways to be intimate from afar. I spent the last of my savings printing several thousand copies. I wanted to leave them in the most quotidian places for strangers to find them, so that he could be as ordinary as newspapers. I wanted to avoid suspicion too, even after his death. My pen name was as far away from my real name as possible. The letterpress hugged the pages with his name, kissed it with the sighing efforts of ink. That's how I held his hand for the last time. Next time you visit Prague, look for my book. Take my book back to your home. put it in your drawer or a sidewalk library. The coffee you spill on it won't be a hindrance. It will be like lives moving on, if clumsily, after the shock of loss. Donate it to a local classroom. Slip my book inside a copy of the Metamorphoses, so that the two can quietly embrace. One book shall become pregnant with the spine of another. Also, someone will remember that Gregor was not alone in those last moments, but cherished, but cared for, but loved. I started working at like a big book retailer, so I think I wrote that dream came to me while I was suffering. So I think half of creativity is about a deep attachment to some vestige of living. It's that part of living that almost isn't directly involved with it, an attempt at imagining and reimagining our way through existence. Sometimes that looks like believing in something so much that you can't help but express it through tiny sculptures, through dream pop or death metal blasting in an East Van warehouse, through a strange but beautiful doodle spray painted on an underground tunnel, through highly intricate gore and illustrations, through animation, through a drag performance, through a knit scarf, through black and gray prison tattoos, through a fancy caviar dish, or a photo of a fancy caviar dish. I think poetry and writing are no different. It's just one particularly privileged way of responding to what's happening to us, a caviar dish without hopefully robbing the sea. It's a way for us, we're human organisms, to learn to be alone with ourselves, as well as to be less alone and to learn to be with others. Something I don't otherwise talk about is the fact that I've been writing before I knew English. The family lore is that as a kid I told these elaborate and vivid stories about animals heavily influenced by the cassette tapes I listened to. In those days I was obsessed with the whimsical, zany, and fantastical world of non-human animals and otherworldly creatures, whether that's in Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky, or in Greek myths, or in stories of the Monkey King, or in the legends in those cassette tapes. But just like forgetting Mandarin and my whimsicality, as I grew up, I lost much of my capacity to world build and imagine a Neopets-like world outside of Neopets. It's that loss that I constantly write against. The tension between writing because you're driven into isolation and writing because you want to be heard. The first commune with other worlds was lively, social, and undeterred. The second one, the one I am slowly walking through and out of, is a lonely one that knows trauma, loss, and all the different systems that make our world violent and uninhabitable. All that is to say, I have really bad insomnia, and I write a lot of my stuff between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Then when I fall asleep, morning poets like Isabella Wang wake up and start writing, and I think someone in literary studies should write a comparison of morning writers and night writers. And the only restraint is to not have a single line of irony about how bad this is for our health. Yeah. If not medically advisable, 60% of what you see and hear comes from me this way. The rest is editing the next few afternoons. Yeah. So in an interview called Love Enough in The Puritan, A.R. Jardine reveals that Dion Brand believes that writing is listening. Listening is what also drives poets like Shazia Hafiz Ramji's process, where she talks about in a recent CBC article about her book, Word Being. And I'd also be interested in tracing how many poets and writers talk about listening in their process and what that, how that makes their work relatable, brilliant, and fascinating, or challenging. I think there's something about the night and being alone, maybe it's the moon, that helps me listen better. Pay attention better to what's happening and to what's happened, to the vestiges of conversation and imagery throughout the day, to the conditions that make writing both possible and impossible, and to my own voice, and not just the sound, because not all writers are hearing, but to the shapes it's making to the air on a microscopic level. It's when the Vancouver rain is howling through your jacket, and we brace with our whole body and change the direction of our upturned umbrella to make it right again. Whether we like it or not, we change the world with our voice, when we tend to the silence with our tender hands. And I really don't know what I'm doing to the air, but I do sneeze a lot. So something that something that is not directly related to writing, but I'm really interested in is documentaries about cults. True crime in general, and that includes like political documentaries, because like political documentaries are just big, gigantic cults. True crime, yeah. I think cults are one form of like incredibly concentrated form of human perversity. It's like my own family survived a cult of personality regime, and then there's some guy in the UK who has like a little awful like shrine in his to Mao in his own home. Like that, what the fuck? Yeah, it's kind of like voyeuristic, but like some contemporary documentaries about cults have been really, really well made. Like I've also done a little bit of film, and like I've gotten just really nerdy about like seeing how people put like a film together and how like all of the different ways to tell like basically the same story. And two of my favorites are Holy Hell and Wild Wild Country. One is about Holy Hell is about a white guy who appropriates Asian spirituality with a bunch of other hippie-dippy white people and is obsessed with working out. The other is about an actual Indian guru and his secretary who come to America to take over some small, mostly white town in Oregon and run a gigantic capitalist commune the size of a corporation. And if you watch these films religiously like me, you realize they're deeply rooted in modern capitalism and our obsession with celebrity and putting all our trust in like someone else when we become so vulnerable and lost and the answers just aren't coming to us anymore. So in conclusion, maybe writing and watching documentaries about cults are a way for me to avoid joining a cult, because who even has time for that? Thanks. Come at me with all the questions, because I know you have them.
Which cult are you least likely to join?
A Maoist cult, obviously. I'm probably not fundamentally Christian cults either. They're a little bit like sketchy, like even without the Anyway, that's a good question.
Which is your favorite cult? You
I
had to join a cult.
don't know. Well, like, so I'm in a cult already, obviously. Oh yes. Well, yeah, that's a whole thing. Moving on. Cults are really interesting, and like the reason I really enjoyed the film Holy Hell is because the guy who filmed it was in the cult, and he it was also a filmmaker, and like throughout his experience, he filmed like so much of the cult stuff, and so he has so much experience doing filmmaking. So then when he like filmed and interviewed like other former cult members, like it was a really deeply empathetic portrayal. And the way that like it was not trying to like say like, oh, it's your fault for joining a cult. It's more like there's a lot of tenderness and like real like feelings that are revealed. So I think it's not, for me, obviously, like the cult itself is not very interesting. It's like some white guy who likes to work out. But this film, I was like, ooh, I'm really interested in the story. I really want to hear about what's happening. Yeah.
So you kind of talked about like listening as part of the writing process, and also with the voyeurism of documentaries, and like, you know, I know that you also have like a background in like journalism and things. So like, sort of how would you say like journalism and sort of your creative writing things interface, kind of?
I think that's hard because, like, I always worry about like stepping on other people's toes and like appropriating voices that aren't mine to appropriate. Like that's why I kind of don't see my nonfiction and poetry as the same. It's like I use one to interview people and to have like process, and the other I use my own voice or like a fictionalized voice to. But then there are opportunities in fiction and poetry to inhabit voices that we otherwise aren't allowed to. So in that way, we have like a way to go beyond the like limitations of straight journalism or whatever. Yeah, I don't know, like, yeah. And like, I guess, yeah, like in a way, like if you, I guess I'm not that much of a journalisty, like investigative journalist poet. Like, I wish I was, it'd be cool, but if I was, I would be doing a lot more research and be a lot, as rigorous as I would